streaming. So if you want to say anything mean, save it for the end. Or say it on live camera. I don't care. Whatever. We have any prayer requests? Uh-oh. And I think Candace is at home not feeling good too. Okay.
Yeah, not that she's going to.
So bloodlines and boundaries. I was like, Anybody, anything else? All right, on this topic of the Middle East and the events of the Middle East, and Lord, I just pray that as we seek to understand the biblical and historical basis for it, that you would keep us within the confines and within the guardrails of the Scripture, that we wouldn't necessarily delve off into speculation except as a matter of interest, but not as a matter of conviction, Lord, and that whatever we come away from out of this study would bring honor and glory to you and your sovereign will and plan for humanity. Lord, again, we love you. We lift these prayer requests up to you tonight that have been mentioned. We give you praise for Miss Diane's want for ice cream. That is a step in the right direction, and we're thankful for that, Lord. So we give you praise for that and continue to lift her up to you. Lord, now as we turn our attentions to the Bible, I pray that you would give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and hearts willing to understand. And I pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we are going into what I think is some seriously underappreciated territory in terms of this whole issue, but also in terms of the Old Testament, thinking about Abraham's other son. All right, so you got Isaac, but what about Ishmael? Where does he fit into this picture? How does all of this kind of tie in together? How does it work? So in some ways, this may be one of the more unsettling nights of I think I've managed to stretch this out to 11 weeks, and if I keep thinking it'll get longer, but I'll try not to. But this is more unsettling than last week, yeah, in a different way. Poor Miss Jackie. Because it's going to ask us to deal with this part of the Bible that we've either ignored or we've been taught to read in a way that I think doesn't fully honor what God's actually doing in that part of the Bible. So if you have your Bible handy, go ahead and flip it to Genesis 16, but I'm going to be jumping between 16, 17, 21, and 25. So get your flippers ready. And part of the reason why we need to do this, as we are dealing with the Middle East, is for two reasons. Number one, of course, we're dealing with Israel, and to deal with Israel, you've got to deal with the patriarchs, right? So you've got to deal with Abraham, and you've got to deal with Isaac. But because we're dealing with the Middle East, we also have to deal with the Muslim community. Just to put this into some perspective for ancestor. That means Christians, that means Jews, that means Muslims. All right, are all claiming Abraham as a spiritual ancestor. Jews trace their lineage, of course, through Isaac. Muslims trace their lineage through Ishmael. Christians supposedly claim the whole story. I say supposedly because we don't really. We claim the Isaac part and we leave the Ishmael part alone because it is uncomfy. When we see the stuff unfold like now I think maybe we're getting to it's not going to last, but I think we're getting to a brief moment of reprieve with the current stuff that's going on in the Middle East. But when you look at the conflict that has always been going on between Israel and Iran, particularly, you are watching at the very deepest level a family dispute. If we don't understand the family, which means the whole family, then we're never going to understand the conflict. I mean, this is the epitome of a he said, she said kind of situation. Y'all have probably heard the expression, it's, his side, her side, and the truth. And that's kind of where we are with this. There's more to it. So I'm going to rehearse how I think most of us learned the story, and then we'll kind of unpack it from there. Abraham and Sarah, the chosen couple. God promises them a son, but Sarah got impatient and gave Abraham her slave Hagar. Kind of as a surrogate, kind of as a stand-in, whatever. Hagar has a son, Ishmael, but that was the wrong son, right? He's the product of human impatience. He's not the product of divine promise. So later, God gives Abraham and Sarah the right son, right? They get Isaac. He's the child of promise. Ishmael is kicked out of the camp, sent away, so to speak. And the story continues through Isaac. End of story. Ishmael becomes kind of a historical footnote. We move on. We're usually taught you don't get ahead of God. You don't get impatient with God. God has a plan. God has perfect timing. You do things according to God's plan. You do things according to God's timing. It all works out. You don't, you get an Ishmael. Like, that's the standard line that most of us have heard. Now, I'm not saying every sermon you've ever heard has followed that line, but that's the predominant summary. It's incomplete. It's a very deeply incomplete understanding of that. So let's go ahead to Genesis 16, verse 1. Genesis 16, verse 1. Sarai said to Abram, "Behold now and Abram listened to the voice of Sarai." Hagar's idea. Okay. Hagar does not speak in this scene. I mean, y'all might accuse me of sounding woke when I talk about this, but I promise I'm not. But Hagar doesn't consent to this. Like, there is no sense in which Hagar has a voice. Hagar is a slave. Hagar is being used like a slave. She is being used as a reproductive instrument by people who have power over her. Now, if you don't think that that happens, I invite you to go look into the darkest parts of the American slave story. And you can go to Thomas Jefferson and you can find children born with slaves that Jefferson never claimed, as an example. So it happened here, it happened there. There are parts of the world in which that still happens. Okay, point one. Second thing, this is completely normal in the ancient Mideast. There are legal documents from Mesopotamia. So some of you might remember the Code of Hammurabi, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that guy. Okay, in that same legal code, this exact arrangement is described. If you are married to a woman who cannot give you a child, you may then produce an heir by a slave. And that child by the slave is entitled to the full measure of inheritance that your child with your wife would be entitled to, if you so choose, right? There's a caveat with this because this isn't your biological child. So let's say 5 years down the road, suddenly you and your wife now conceive a child. Well, then it's up to you. Do you want the firstborn with the slave? Or do you want the firstborn with your wife to have that claim to inheritance? So it complicates things a little bit. Sarah's not inventing something here. She's using the social, for lack of a better way to put it, social technology available to her. All right? And it's interesting, the Bible does not praise it, but it also doesn't condemn it. It just tells us what happened. And in some ways, that's one of the cool things about the Bible. It doesn't airbrush the patriarchs, right? We are the ones who say, oh, they're the patriarchs. Boom, let's put them up there on their pedestals. And it's like, okay, you do that to your own peril. Like, recognize these men are human, and they do dumb things. We talked about, I mean, he's not a patriarch. We talked about David this morning, David and Bathsheba and all of that stuff. Man after God's own heart. But also, I like what I see up there. You know, they're human. So look at what happens when the plan succeeds. I'm skipping to verse 4. He went into Hagar and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, what did she do? She looked with contempt upon her mistress. Okay, so now this is Hagar's reaction to Sarah. She looks at her with contempt. The household is falling apart. Hagar, now pregnant, has gained a status that Sarah lacks, and the power dynamics shift. Because now Hagar is able to do something and has done something that Sarah was not able to do for Abraham, or Abram at this point. Sarah is threatened. She's furious. She blames Abraham. And Abraham, by pattern, like we know this is Abraham's son who, notice he recognizes it. Behold, your servant is in your power. No playing the game. Do to her as you please. Two words in Hebrew that are translated as dealt harshly is the same root used in Exodus chapter 1, verses 11 and 12 for what Egypt did to Israel. Abuse, oppression, the whole 9 yards. The Egyptians made the people of Israel serve with rigor and made their lives bitter. Sarah, matriarch of the chosen family, afflicts Hagar, an Egyptian woman, by the way. I mean, that's no accident, with the same kind of oppression that Israel will later suffer from Egypt. Genesis is telling us that the chosen family is capable of behaving like Pharaoh. All right? Election does not guarantee righteousness. So even though they are God's chosen people, even though they are the people through whom the Messiah will arrive, they're not immune from mistakes. They're not immune from bad behavior. They're not immune from sin. What does Hagar do? She runs. She's a pregnant, enslaved woman alone in the wilderness. Not a happy place, not somewhere you want to be. And apparently she's headed back toward Egypt because that's the only place that she could have received a direct encounter with the Lord, or with the angel, a foreign female enslaved pregnant runaway. Thus, like it would have then. She's at the bottom of absolutely every social hierarchy possible. And the angel of the Lord finds her, verse 7. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. She didn't go looking for God. She didn't go looking for the angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord found her. She's running for her life, and God came looking for her. All right, there's the gospel in Genesis 16. I'm going to move on. The angel tells her, you need to go back. You need to return. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm Hagar, and what has happened to Hagar has happened to me, I ain't interested in going back. I ain't going back to that mean old woman. What are you talking about? Not me. In its original context, this story is about the survival of her child within the household structure. Ishmael is not going to stand a chance with Sarah. Ishmael is not going to stand a chance, probably, with Abraham at the end of the day. And if Abraham and Sarah ever do have a child, Ishmael's not going to stand a chance with him either. So, I mean, you're thinking about the mother position. No. But the angel makes a promise to her for you. Because when you go back to chapter 15, multiply your offspring, cannot be numbered. What does that sound like? The promise made to Abraham. Hagar, a slave woman from Egypt, is receiving a promise that directly echoes the Abrahamic covenant. She's not a footnote. She's not a cautionary tale. She's a recipient of God's direct, personal, covenantal attention. And what we know about God is, when He makes a covenant, you may not keep up your end of the bargain, but guess who does? Okay? So, her son's name will be Ishmael, which means in Hebrew, God hears. The Lord has listened to your affliction, the angel says. The God who hears the cry of the oppressed begins with Hagar. And then Hagar does something that, as far as I can tell, only one other person in the entire Bible does. And that's in verse 13. So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing," for she said, "Truly here I have seen him who looks after me." The thing that she does is she gives God a name. Most of the time in the Bible, God gives names to people, such as changing Abram to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah, Saul to Paul, right? We see that a lot. This is inverted. She is giving a name to God. Now it depends on who's saying it, but if you say it the way that most English speakers say it, it sounds like the Jetsons. Elroy, all right? If you say it in the Hebrew, it's something closer to El Roi, or Roi, depending on who's saying it, the God who sees me. Okay, so Ishmael is God hears. El Roi, the God who sees me. Okay? This is not Paul, this is not David, this is not Moses, this is not Isaiah, this is a runaway pregnant Egyptian slave woman who is approaching the God of the universe and giving him a name. The writer is making a statement here, right? God's attention is not limited just to the chosen family. Sure, they are the chosen family, but that's not a limiting factor. He sees the outcast, he hears the discarded, and he meets the person who has been kicked out of camp. All right, now go to chapter 17. God appears to Abraham again, and he restates the covenant, and this time he's in the process of changing names, right? This is where Abram becomes Abraham, and Sarai becomes Sarah. And Abraham, in verse 18, gives one of the most humanly tender moments in all of Genesis. Abraham says to God, "Oh, that Ishmael may live before you." That's a father's heart, right? I want my son, even though it happened the way that it did, even though it's problematic the way that it happened, I want my son to live for you. And I want you to look upon him with favor. He's not trying to distance himself from the mistake. Sarah's the one who kicked Hagar out of the camp, not Abraham. Now, you can finesse that a little bit. Abraham told her to do what you want to with Hagar. But he's not calling the shot. He's turning the shot over to Sarah, which, by the way, plug for the sermon this morning. This is Abraham deferring leadership to Sarah when he should have dealt with it, right? God's response in verse 20, not the standard Sunday school response. "As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold," here it comes again, "I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation." So if you're a Bible marker, you might want to say, "I have blessed him." This is God speaking. This is not Abraham hoping. This is not Hagar dreaming. God himself declares, "I have blessed Ishmael. He will be fruitful. He will be multiplied. He will become a great nation. He will father princes," the whole 9 yards. Now, verse 21 goes on to say that the covenant will be established through Isaac. All right, so yes, the line of promise continues through the younger son, but the blessing on Ishmael is not a consolation prize. We treat it that way sometimes. It's not. It's not a polite dismissal. It's not to get Abraham to shut up. It's a real promise. It's a generous promise, and it comes directly from the mouth of God. So here's a question that we got to hold on to with this. If God has blessed Ishmael, what does it mean for Christians to treat Ishmael's descendants as cursed? Because if you want to fast forward in history, Jews trace their lineage through Isaac. Muslims trace their lineage through Ishmael. Kind of have a problem there, a little bit of a problem. We treat them as cursed. We treat them as enemies. Sometimes we treat them as irrelevant, right? Like that just doesn't matter. Okay, fine. I'll let you have it. Islam, as practiced by the regime in Iran, is evil. Islam on its face, which we'll talk about next week, is not that bad. Now, am I saying Muslims are going to be saved through it? No, not saying that. What I am saying is it's a very different thing than what we have painted all of Islam with because of the way that terrorism is presented in the media. We have to be careful about that. All right, now some of you are thinking, maybe, what about Galatians 4? Because in Galatians 4, Paul uses the story of Hagar and Sarah as an allegory. And he says that Hagar represents the covenant of law, so Mount Sinai, slavery, earthly Jerusalem, all of that, and that Sarah represents the covenant of promise, freedom, heavenly Jerusalem, whatever. And he's quoting Genesis, and he says, cast out the slave woman and her son. Right? He's quoting Sarah from the Genesis passage we just looked at. That has been badly misused. Paul is making an argument here about grace and the law, not about the worth of two ethnic groups. This is a principled argument, slavery to the law versus freedom in Christ. He's not saying, Arab people are condemned, right? He's not saying, this reminds me, and maybe this will make some sense to you, I don't know, but it reminds me a lot of, there used to be, I don't hear it very often anymore, but there used to be this idea that, I'm probably going to get canceled on Facebook for being live and saying this, but join the club, there we go. There was a line that said that black people were cursed, that's why their skin was dark, and they were descended of Ham. Okay, y'all have heard that before. It's garbage, it's dumb, it has no theological basis, but an awful lot of people believed it for a really long time. I'm putting this on that same level because we've misunderstood the Bible when it comes to that issue. We have misunderstood. Paul is not talking about modern Muslims. He's not here. He's not seeing modern Muslims. He can't be talking about modern Muslims. To say it that way and to understand Galatians 4 that way is to make Paul say something that he's not saying because he can't say it. All right? The other thing is, you got to let the Bible interpret itself. And if Paul meant in Galatians 4 that Muslim people should or Arab people, or however you want to think about it, should be disregarded or regarded as enemies, then are we willing to let Paul override God? And you can't do that, right? They're both God. Now, I'm not saying Paul is God. Let me rephrase that. What Paul is giving to us in the letter to the Galatian people is from God. And so is the covenant. And so is the promise made to Hagar. So it's all got to fit together somehow. So if God says, I have blessed Ishmael and I will make him into a great nation, there's nothing that can unsay that except God. And God hasn't done that. But also, if we are going to use Paul's allegory to diminish Hagar and Ishmael, then we need to also reckon with the fact that Paul himself was the chief of sinners. Right? His own words. I mean, he uses that. He was a man who once held the coats of people who were stoning a Christian to death. Multiple Christians to death, actually. He did it more than once. So the entire arc of his life and the entire arc of his testimony points to the fact that God's grace reaches the people you least expect. Which is exactly what Genesis is saying about Hagar and about Ishmael. That also makes what happens next all the more painful. Go to chapter 21. Isaac has been born. There is a feast to celebrate his weaning. And Sarah sees Ishmael. The Hebrew word there might mean laughing, the way we usually have it translated. It might mean mocking, but either way, verse 10, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. There comes Sarah again. She doesn't say Hagar, she doesn't say Ishmael, she says this slave woman and her son. By the way, let's roll the tape back. Whose idea was this? Sarah's. But now who has sour grapes over it? Sarah. She strips them of their names, she reduces them to categories, she demands their expulsion. Notice, she doesn't just demand that Ishmael be removed from the line of inheritance. And Abraham would have had a decision. Does he get the firstborn share or does he get the secondborn share? He could have decided that. She doesn't give him the option. She says, get out, get them out. Matriarch of Israel doing something very cruel. And in verse 11, the text doesn't hide it, this thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. We see the father's heart once again. He's grieved. He doesn't want to do this, but interestingly, God tells him to listen to Sarah with the assurance that Ishmael will become a nation because he is your offspring. So even in the moment of expulsion, God affirms the connection. Ishmael is not being erased from the family. He's being sent on a different path, but it is a path that God will walk with him. And then we come to one of the most devastating scenes in all of the Bible. Abraham gets up early and sends Hagar and Ishmael away with nothing but bread and a skin of water into the wilderness of Beersheba. And what happens? The water runs out. Verse 15. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. So she takes Ishmael, she sticks him under a bush, and she walks away.
How old is Ishmael this time? 15?
Ishmael is still
And the Bible says he's 13.
so Isaac is 13-ish, maybe older than that. Some people say 13, some people say 30, I don't know. Ishmael, yeah, teenager, but young enough not to really be able to do for himself. Because the implication here is she's leaving him to starve to death. Right. So she walks off, cannot bear to watch him die. She sits down, lifts up her head, and weeps. So now here you go again. We're back in the wilderness, a mother in the desert, watching her child die of thirst, and turning away because she can't bear to watch it. Now, whatever theology you bring to this story, you got to deal with that. Because it's not just thrown in there for funsies, right? It is what is happening right now. You have mothers in war zones. Both ways, by the way. Mothers in war zones in the Mideast, mothers here who know where their sons are and their daughters are. And they know that in those places, things are not good. And they know that in those places, there's nothing they can do. All right? I told you we'd talk about water. We will have a whole week on water, but just to go ahead and throw you in there. In Gaza, the water infrastructure is gone because of the way that Israel proceeded through after October 7. Now, I'm not here to tell you whether it was right or wrong. I'm just saying, water infrastructure is gone. You've got a similar thing in Yemen. Point being, Hagar's grief is still with us. But here comes God, verse 17. God heard the voice of the boy, which presumably means what? He's under the bush praying, crying, something. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. So there he goes again. Ishmael means God hears. And what happens? God hears his cry. El Roi. What does it mean? The God who sees. And what does God do for her? Opens her eyes. there's a well, there's water, there's life. So then the text says in verse 20, God was with the boy and he grew up. With in the Hebrew, by the way, means with, not over there, not, watching from his ring camera in heaven. With him. We got to be careful too. The well was already there. Verse 19 says God opened her eyes and she saw a well. The well was there the whole time. But Hagar was unable to see it because of everything that had gone on, because of her grief, for whatever reason. I mean, she was in one of those states. It was right in front of her. She could not see it. And I think it's very interesting because God doesn't create something. What he instead does is shows her what's already there. And he does the same thing when he reaffirms the promise. He's going to live. I'm going to make out of him a great nation. This is now the third time that Hagar has been told this in some way or another. One more thing that we need to say about Hagar before we move. There are women, particularly in Iran, who have no power over the decisions that have been their lives. They don't. They are displaced, they are discarded, they are whatever by wars they didn't necessarily start. What the Bible tells us here is God sees those women. God sees that affliction. He hears their children. Here's our failing. Do we hear them? Do we see them? Do we acknowledge them as the church? And I think what we do is we watch the news and we get mad. I would invite you to consider what you would want somebody to do if we were Iran. Would we want the rest of the world to look at us? Oh, by the way, never mind. We don't have to think about it that way. We can do it. 3/4 of the world hates our current president. Also means they hate us because we put him there. Do we deserve that? Yeah. Do we deserve that? No. But is it forced on us because of the way we've been portrayed? Yes. Same thing. So now let's go to a detail nobody really talks about. Genesis 25. Abraham is dead. Very old. And verse 9 tells us who buried him. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah. Isaac and Ishmael together at their father's grave. Now, we don't know what this looks like. We don't know if they're standing side by side. We don't know if they carried him and put him in there together. We don't know. Maybe they're standing on opposite sides. But they are at least there at the same time. We don't know if there's reconciliation. We don't even really know whether they disliked each other or not. I don't think they really get the chance because of Sarah, right? But after these years of separation, these two brothers, separated by decades of conflict, separated by the choices of their parents, come together to bury the father they shared, which is Abraham. Now, this is not the point where I get all sentimental and say, if Isaac and Ishmael could get along, so can we. Okay, sorry, it's bigger than that. It's a lot easier to solve conflict between two people than it is between, several million. Okay? But I will say this. The Bible gives us in Genesis 25:9 an image of what shared humanity looks like at its most basic. Two estranged people standing in the same place, doing the same thing for the same reason. And at least at whatever level, grief levels the playing field. Right? Death is the great equalizer, both in terms of ourselves and also for those who would grieve us. But now here's what's at stake with all of this. There are 1.9 billion Muslims in the world. Okay? That's not a small number. I should have looked up didn't do it, should have done it. How many Roman Catholics there are in the world? You wouldn't find that number to be that terribly far apart. One thing, in some sense, that Islam has, I'm going to say this carefully, done better than Christianity is it hasn't allowed itself to fracture in the same ways that Christianity has. You've got two main branches of Islam. You've got several hundred, maybe even 1,000 branches of Christianity because of fracturing. Whatever the case may be, 1.9 billion Muslims. Ishmael is not a minor character. Okay, he is a prophet. He is the ancestor through whom they trace their connection to Abraham. In Islamic tradition, Isaac doesn't go up the mountain, Ishmael does. They have a whole festival that celebrates that. When Muslims perform the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, part of the ritual involves running between two hills because they're reenacting Hagar's search for water for her son. Hagar is a hero. Ishmael is their Isaac, quite literally. So the full picture is Jews trace their lineage through Isaac, Muslims trace their lineage through Ishmael, Christians, again, supposedly claim the whole story, and our Bible says that God blessed both sons. God heard Ishmael, God saw Hagar, God provided a well in the desert, God promised Ishmael a great future. What we're not watching in the Middle East is a conflict between the chosen and the unchosen, or the blessed and the cursed, or whatever. We're watching a family fight. It's a very ugly family fight, but it's a family fight. We should not be asking the question, which brother was right in that story. What we should be asking is, what kind of God blesses both brothers? And the answer is, the God of Abraham. The God who sees Hagar in the desert. The God who hears Ishmael crying. The God who gives Isaac the covenant and blesses Ishmael with a nation. I'm very happy to report to you tonight that the God that we worship is bigger than our categories. I'm very sad to report to you tonight that we will never understand everything about that God, because we like categories. Categories make lives easier. If you've ever met somebody who's incredibly black and white, they operate in categories. This is right, this is wrong. I don't need to know why you did what you did. I don't care what happened. God somehow manages to do both. Sin is wrong. Sin has to be punished. But also grace can be extended and can be forgiven. Sin can be forgiven. It's complicated. It's hard. The stuff with Isaac and Ishmael, it's complicated, right? It's hard. But if that's the God that we worship, then we are not free to dismiss half of Abraham's family as irrelevant or dangerous or God-forsaken. They're simply not, by virtue of the promise made to Hagar about Ishmael. They're not. 1 in 4 people are Muslim. You don't think about that in the Bible Belt. We don't run across very many of them. But globally speaking, 1 in 4. Many of them live in countries that have been or are being bombed and sanctioned and destabilized and ignored and whatever else. And yet for all of them, even the evil ones, their connection to Abraham is not an academic point. It's a spiritual reality for them. We may disagree with it. We may understand that the conclusions at which Islam arrives are fundamentally incompatible with Christianity. Yeah, that's true. It's absolutely true. I mean, I'm sorry. They may think that Allah and Jesus, not Jesus, Jesus is just a prophet, but Allah and Yahweh are the same. They're not. The characterization of Allah is very different than the characterization of Yahweh. But at least up to a certain point, the path that they travel is a parallel path until you get to practice and, frankly, until you get to more modern interpretations of Islam. By the way, Islam itself, I should have looked this up. I'll give it to you next week. It's not as old as certainly Judaism as a religion. It's definitely not as old as Christianity, but it's reasonably old. There have been Muslims for a very long time. And Christians have always found a way to combat them. Right? Go back to the Middle Ages and look at the Crusades. What are the Crusades about? The Catholic Church at the time, the major only Christian institution, retaking the Holy Land from the Muslims. Okay, why? Well, we go back to the land. To whom does it belong? Does it belong to the Jews and the Christians, or does it belong to the Muslims? Well, I guess by that logic, if we want to go back to the deed of the original family, it belongs to the Abrahamic people. Right? I mean, that's uncomfortable. We don't really like to think about it that way, but there is a way you can make that argument. Point being, these are people who are made in the image of God. These are people who have been made promises by God. These are people who descend from major movers and shakers, let's say it that way, in our own faith. But they're also people that we have basically discarded as wrong, as problematic, as evil, as, you know, there's a guy, I go to the C.S. Lewis Society John Monet goes with me, kicking and screaming probably. She doesn't say that, she's a good sport. But there is on occasion one or two foreign students who come in who are Muslim. And we sit there, we're talking about C.S. Lewis and mere Christianity and Jesus and all the rest of it. They roll with us. You wouldn't know. I mean, they're not coming in antagonizing. They're not coming in and trying to wipe us off the face of the earth or shout death to America or whatever like that. They're normal people who believe differently than we do. People who need to understand who Jesus really is, but you don't get them there by blowing them up. You don't get them there by discarding them. Now, I'm saying all of this. Don't put me in the same category that the president has put the Pope in. Okay? There are reasons for war. There are reasons for attacks. This is not a political Bible study. This is about the spiritual dimension of all of this. And where we can get into the political dimension, we will. Stuff like the land, we can go there. I'm not going to stand up here and going to tell you that the president was right or wrong in calling these attacks.